In the early evening of February 9, 2004, a 21-year-old nursing student named Maura Murray left her dorm room at the University of Massachusetts Amherst and vanished into one of the most enduring mysteries in modern American true crime history. Before her disappearance, Maura appeared to be living the life of a typical college student, balancing classes, clinical work, and her part-time job at a campus security desk. But beneath the surface, her life was far more complicated. A series of emotional struggles, academic pressures, and personal conflicts were building around her, silently shaping the final days before she went missing. What we do know is this: Maura packed up her belongings, emailed her professors that she would be gone for a week due to a family emergency, an emergency that did not exist, and drove north toward the White Mountains of New Hampshire. It was a decision that no one around her fully understood. She told no friends. She told no roommates. She told no family. By 7:27 p.m., Maura's black Saturn sedan crashed into a snowbank along a rural road in Haverhill, New Hampshire. A neighbor heard the impact, looked outside, and saw a young woman standing beside the vehicle. Minutes later, police arrived at the scene, only to find the car locked, airbags deployed, the windshield cracked, and Maura Murray was gone. No tracks in the snow, no signs of a struggle, no footprints leading into the woods. Nothing. Just like that, a 90-second window created a 20-year mystery. Her disappearance triggered one of the largest search efforts New Hampshire had ever seen. Detectives, volunteers, K-9 units, helicopters, all combed the White Mountains, hunting for any trace of her. But the trail went cold almost immediately. And every theory that followed, abduction, runaway, foul play, intentional disappearance, or a tragic accident, created more confusion than clarity. Some believe Maura fled her life intentionally. Some believe she was picked up by a passing stranger. Others believe she met with violence, possibly from someone she already knew. And a few believe that investigators have never revealed everything they found. As the years passed, Maura's story transformed into one of America's most widely discussed unsolved cases, the subject of documentaries, podcasts, online forums, and a massive digital community determined to uncover the truth. But in the end, we are left with the same haunting question. What really happened to Maura Murray on that cold February night? This case remains open. It remains unsolved. And nearly 2 decades later, the silence is louder than ever. On the evening of February 9, 2004, the air over Haverhill, New Hampshire was crisp and cold. Maura Murray, a 21-year-old nursing student at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, had been driving north on Route 112, a narrow and winding road that cuts through the White Mountains forests. Earlier that day, she had told her work supervisor that she was taking a week off due to a family emergency. She told others she was going to Vermont. Later, some would say she mentioned family in a delicate, cryptic way. No one would know then how far those explanations fell short of the truth. At about 7:27 p.m., a passing driver found Maura's car, a dark-colored 1996 Saturn, off the right shoulder, the rear end slightly damaged, the rear bumper partially detached. The car sat where road met ditch, headlights probably already on night mode. There were no immediate signs of a prolonged struggle. The driver reported the vehicle to police. Trooper James Hall, responding to what initially appeared to be a single-car crash or a minor accident, arrived on scene within minutes. When Trooper Hall approached the vehicle, he found it unlocked and empty. The interior showed signs of being hastily abandoned. A suitcase and items of clothing were missing from the trunk, while inside the car, personal items, a nasal spray, a travel mug, a small envelope with what would later be identified as Maura's phone number, remained behind. Paperwork in the glove box indicated the car belonged to Maura. In the snow nearby, there were footprints and faint impressions, but they did not immediately tell a clear story. There was no sign of blood. There was no corpse. There was no dramatic scene. Only a car, the hush of a February night, and a young woman who had disappeared. Trooper Hall reported that Maura's cell phone, when called, rang from a nearby house, and then stopped. He noted that Maura's automobile registration and driver's license were present. He looked for witnesses. A few residents in the area said they had seen a woman at the edge of the road earlier, possibly hitchhiking, possibly walking toward the trees. A neighbor reported seeing a person walking further down the road in the direction of the nearby ski resort. Another neighbor later recalled seeing a vehicle slowly pass the area. What would later be described as inconsistent statements and uncertain timelines began to form within the first hours. Some witnesses claimed to have seen a woman get into a gray pickup truck after the crash. Others insisted the woman walked toward the nearby woods. Investigators found no CCTV footage. This was a rural area, and the trail of hard, objective evidence began to thin quickly. The immediate questions were simple and sharp. Had Maura been involved in something she did not disclose? Had she been picked up by a good Samaritan? Had she met with foul play within minutes of leaving her car? Or had she vanished into the sympathy of the forest, succumbing to hypothermia or disorientation in the snow and failing to return? As the clock ticked into the early hours of February 10th, officers searched the roadside, the trees, the ditch, and the dark pull-off areas of Route 112. Local volunteers and state troopers shone flashlights into the woods. Dogs were brought but struggled in the cold and deep snow. Searches returned no definitive sign of Maura. Her absence became the dominant fact, a quiet, impossible emptiness where answers should have been. By the morning of February 10th, the case had transitioned from a missing person report into a full-scale investigation. The University of Massachusetts notified Maura's family, and the alarm spread quickly. Detectives from multiple agencies started piecing together Maura's last known hours, the phone calls she made, the messages she left, the people who last spoke with her. They mapped her route and retraced her steps. Investigators learned Maura had withdrawn cash from an ATM in Framingham, Massachusetts earlier that day. She had packed a modest bag, a sweater, a laptop, some toiletries. Colleagues and friends described Maura as bright, reserved, and independent, someone who generally avoided drama. Yet interviews revealed stressors, an impending chance of being reprimanded at work, a strained family situation, and a breakup that had affected her. None of these provided a motive that fit an abrupt disappearance in the woods. Search and rescue operations began in earnest. The state police, local search teams, and volunteers coordinated grid searches in the forest and checked trailheads. Trees and embankments were combed, culverts were inspected, abandoned cabins and outbuildings were checked. The challenging New England winter complicated everything. Deep snow-muffled clues erased tracks and made areas impassable by vehicle. Canine units initially tracked promising scents, but often lost slivers of trail. Officers interviewed dozens of witnesses. A student who had spoken to Maura at a college party hours earlier recounted their conversation. Maura had seemed quiet, distracted. Farm workers and neighbors described a range of sightings. A woman walking on Route 112, a pickup truck that slowed near the crash site, a vehicle idling on the shoulder. None of these accounts aligned cleanly, and policing resources were stretched thin. Detectives also examined Maura's phone and email records. One cryptic detail emerged. A voicemail left on Maura's phone from an unknown number, recorded a few days before her disappearance, with a voice that could not be identified. Investigators compared vehicle descriptions against DMV databases, ran background checks on persons of interest, and followed up on traffic stop reports in the region around the time of the disappearance. The initial fieldwork felt exhaustive, methodical, and yet somehow not enough. Over the next days, the case became national news. With media attention grew tips, a deluge of them, many unreliable. People phoned in claims that ranged from possibly consequential to plainly absurd. Detectives had to separate rumor from evidence. Commanders set up a centralized call center to manage leads, but the influx of information overwhelmed the investigators' capacity. Every new tip required checking. Every anonymous account needed verification. Months of inquiries unfolded. Cadaver dogs were called in to comb remote areas in warmer months when snow had melted. Volunteers used grid search techniques and aerial surveys. Despite these efforts, the physical evidence that could explain Maura's movements after the crash remained elusive. There were scattered objects, an altered timeline, and contradictory sightings, but no body, no definitive trace, no conclusive answer. It is this mixture of careful investigation and persistent ambiguity that defines the Maura Murray case. The police did what they could with the resources and technology available in 2004. But their diligent labor encountered a fundamental limit: the terrain that night and the lack of a clear chain of custody for any evidence that might have existed. And when official inquiries slowed, amateur sleuths and online communities began to re-examine the case, filling gaps with their own theories and searches. In the years since Maura Murray vanished, numerous theories have been proposed to explain what happened. Some are grounded in witness testimony and physical circumstances. Others rely on conjecture and the appetite for narrative that every unsolved case invites. We will review the principal theories, present the evidence each rests upon, and explain the limitations that prevent definitive conclusions. One of the earliest and most straightforward theories suggests Maura was the victim of opportunistic violence. In this model, she either accepted a ride from a stranger or was approached by a passerby after the crash. The rural setting, nighttime isolation, and cold conditions would make a solitary woman both vulnerable and hard to locate. Proponents point to witness reports of a pickup truck and drivers who recall slowing near the crash scene. The problem with this hypothesis is the absence of a body and the lack of forensic evidence linking any vehicle or person to Maura's disappearance. Another theory posits voluntary disappearance, that Maura chose to disappear deliberately, perhaps to escape personal problems or start anew. Supporters of this idea cite her packed bag, the withdrawal of cash, and some apparent secrecy in her communication the days preceding her departure. But this theory faces practical challenges. Maura had left behind important items and had not taken steps that most people who plan to start a new life would take. No forged IDs, no clear plan for transportation beyond the local area, and no credible sightings of her establishing a new identity. A third theory looks inward to Maura's social circles. Could someone she knew, a boyfriend, acquaintance, or employer, have been involved? Investigators did explore this avenue, interviewing friends and known associates. While certain interpersonal conflicts and relationship strains emerged in interviews, no definitive link to a violent act was substantiated. More controversial are theories suggesting organized criminal involvement or human trafficking. These ideas appeal to the darker corners of possibility, but they require evidence, transaction patterns, known trafficking routes, or linkages to known criminal networks operating in the region. To date, investigators have found no convincing proof that Maura's disappearance fits these larger criminal frameworks. Online sleuths and independent investigators also introduced alternate scenarios, misidentified witnesses, planted false leads, and even the possibility that Maura suffered an accident in a location not initially searched. Technology enthusiasts have reanalyzed cell phone tower pings, ATM camera footage, and traffic patterns. Some find small anomalies, an unaccounted gap in a timeline, an odd call. That might be important. Others argue that these are artifacts of noisy data, not signals. Throughout, the most compelling truth is the most frustrating. Each theory explains some facts and leaves others untouched. The landscape of plausible explanations is wide, and without the anchor of new physical evidence, most of these remain speculative. What remains ominous and real is Maura's absence and the fact that, after nearly 2 decades, many of the concrete breadcrumbs that might have answered the case are gone, obscured by time, weather, and human error. As you consider these theories, remember the difference between possibility and proof. An unsolved case invites stories. Our task is to separate compelling narrative from evidence-based inference. And in Maura's case, the silence left behind is the most stubborn form of uncertainty. The disappearance of Maura Murray captured the public imagination and became a case study in how media, communities, and the internet shape an investigation. Early on, regional newspapers ran daily updates. The story spread to national outlets. Images of Maura circulated widely, photographs, sketches, and later, digitally enhanced recreations, all aimed at keeping attention on the search and the hope of answers. In the years that followed, the case took on new life online. Amateur investigators, bloggers, and true crime podcasters dissected every piece of available evidence. Forums and message boards hosted hundreds of threads. Crowdsourcing resources and ideas became a public way of continuing the investigation beyond official means. Some efforts produced useful leads, others devolved into speculation, infighting, and the circulation of misinformation. Nonetheless, This online engagement kept the case alive in public memory and pressured officials to re-examine old leads. For Maura's family, the ordeal has been an ongoing private tragedy under the glare of public curiosity. Interviews, documentaries, and investigative books have attempted to reconstruct the final hours and to advocate for renewed searches. Law enforcement periodically revisited the case as new tips emerged, and cold case units have reviewed files when resources permitted. Yet, for every re-examination, there are limits: budgetary, procedural, and evidentiary. Contemporary investigators and experts often point to two critical lessons from the Maura Murray case. First, the importance of early, comprehensive evidence preservation. Snow, weather, and civilian traffic can destroy or contaminate crucial traces within hours. Second, the weight of public attention. Media can generate leads, but can also swamp investigators with noise, sometimes hindering methodical police work. Where does the case stand today? Maura remains missing. There have been occasional reported sightings across the country and even internationally, none substantiated. Occasional documentaries and retrospectives reintroduce the case to a new generation, and every now and then, a tip leads to a fresh review. But absent a concrete discovery, physical remains, verified DNA evidence, or an arrest, the story remains incomplete. As we close this file, consider the human dimension beneath the headlines and theories. A young woman with plans and promise, a family left with questions, and a community that searched in a winter cold for answers that never arrived. If you have information that could help investigators, contact the New Hampshire State Police Cold Case Unit or the relevant authorities. Respectful tips can be submitted anonymously, but they must be factual and specific to be useful. Thank you for joining Hidden Truth Casebook for this deep dive into the disappearance of Maura Murray. If you found this exploration compelling, subscribe for more cases and leave any carefully considered leads or references in the comments. We will examine credible suggestions in future episodes. For now, Maura's story remains an echo on a snowy road, a silence that still waits to be explained.